Hey everyone, this tutorial is going to focus on modeling complex geometries like Frank Gehry and Lebbeus Woods do. So Lebbeus Woods obviously kind of uses a bunch of different parts to aggregate into this really kind of complex form, whereas Frank Gehry uses a lot of kind of folding surfaces, and you can start to see the resemblance between some of these things. But Frank Gehry in particular, I think that his drawing style is better done by hand, so we're not going to focus on like replicating his formal styles in Illustrator. I think it'd be much more beneficial to show you how some of this stuff gets built in a 3D modeling program, and I think the same applies here. So the first part of this video will show how to kind of model the same form between these two, because you can see there's at least some kind of like this fractured resemblance between them. And then afterwards, Anakin, I'm going to have a specific tutorial on how to get this stuff done in Illustrator, and then for Isaac and Nate, you guys will have kind of a different post-processing based on what he does with some of his drawings, which I don't have pulled up right now, but we'll get into that at a later time. So this video is going to be dedicated to modeling complex form. The first thing that I want you all to do is go to the first URL in the description. I'll put it in the description. And I want you to download the sprinkler command. It's not necessary to have this, but it certainly does make things a lot faster. Basically, all you have to do is click on the link that says sprinkler, and that'll download a zip file to your downloads folder, at which point you can just extract those files. And then once we open up just the regular unzipped folder, we're going to have an RVB file. And then what we're going to do is have our couch model opened up, and we're going to do load script. And mine's already here, but yours is going to be blank. All you have to do is hit add and then double click on that RVB file, and then it should load it into Rhino. I think you might have to restart it in order for it to take effect, but you'll notice that now I can type in what's called the sprinkler command, and it'll actually run the command within the program. So the first thing I'd like to do is do a file save as, so that we can kind of start a new file. This is going to get complex, and you're going to need to have backups, and you're going to want to save often. So I'm going to go ahead and go to, we're going to name this one ARC Tutorials, then like complex forms. And now once I've done my save as, I'm just going to copy only the necessary information over. So I don't really need these notations. The grid, I could probably take it or leave it, but I'm going to go ahead and just copy over my surfaces, and that should actually probably be okay for now. If you don't have the gumball turned on down here, you're going to want to make sure that it's highlighted. You'll notice that that thing disappears. Basically what that's allowing me to do is drag it up, left, right, down, etc. Then you're also going to want to make sure that O-snap is turned on, and that all of these things along the bottom are turned on that I have turned on. So basically all of them except for center, tangent, and vertex. And what I'm going to be able to do from here is type in copy, and I'm going to go ahead and click on this bottom point and then move it over, I don't know, 50 feet. And what you'll notice what happens when I hit enter is that it's going to move it in a consistent radius around this point. And if I hold down shift, I can simply move it 50 feet off to the side. And then to make sure that we have this as a reference to come back to, I'm going to go ahead and type in lock and make sure that that is no longer selectable. So I'm going to go over to my surfaces right here, and I'm going to go ahead and isolate this top surface. If yours, when you click on it, selects the entire thing, you're going to go ahead and type explode. And then you'll notice that it's all individual pieces. In order to combine them, you simply select everything and type in join, and then it becomes one piece. So if I have the exploded version, I'm going to go ahead and move this guy off to the side. I don't know that I'll really need this stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it for this tutorial. And basically what we're going to do is take this and treat it as a floor plan, and then basically kind of decorate the exterior of our building, quote unquote, with more surfaces like this. So if I get it into a position maybe like this, I'm going to go ahead and type make 2D and make sure that my scene silhouette is checked, maintain source layers is checked, and that should be good. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And then once I go back into my top view, I'm going to notice that that line work shows up. So the reason I did the scene silhouette is so I can just simply click this outside Actually, I'm going to go over to my Make 2D and just make sure that the scene silhouette is the only thing that's on. So if I get rid of these surfaces, you'll notice that those interior lines disappear. And I'm going to go ahead and select this and explode it and then trim it because we'll see that this line work is extra and we don't want that. So now when I select everything and type in join, I should have a single line on the outside that we can bat with. Great. So we're going to bring that up closer to our couch surface, and we are going to go back into our perspective view, and we're going to make this our floor plan, like I said. If you look at what Frank Gehry does, we'll say Frank Gehry drawing. Let's see. This is the one that I kind of have in mind. It's very much you have some kind of floor plate and it's decorated with these exterior surfaces. So that's actually the Louis Vuitton Foundation kind of exterior. We're going to be doing something similar to this as far as textures and kind of these side adornments are concerned. So we're going to go back into Rhino and we can start to see some of that irregular floor plan show up here. So if I have my line work selected and type in scale, I'm just going to make this like, I don't know, 3 times bigger. Maybe even 5 times bigger. That'll probably make more sense. And I'm going to select this and put it on a new layer by right clicking over here and hitting new layer, and we will call this floor outline. I'm going to make it red, and I'm going to go ahead and change the object layer on that. I also want to create 3 new layers called interior, or we'll do panel, interior, panel, mid, and panel exterior. And we're just going to make those 3 random different colors like green, let's say magenta, and white. Actually, we'll do a cyan. Again, those colors don't matter. What we're going to do is basically if we type in Extrude Curve, and I have my floor outline selected, we're going to notice that this shape is basically, the line work that we had is basically going to get extruded upwards. So I'm going to do something like this, basically that's slightly larger than this panel that I have right here. And I'm actually going to make a couple of copies of this panel. And the way I'm going to do that is by holding down Alt on my gumball and clicking and dragging. And that'll give me 3 copies of that thing. Alternatively, you can simply select it and type in copy and just kind of put them wherever. So once I have 4 of these, I'm going to change one to an interior panel. I'm going to change one to a middle panel, and I'm going to change one to an exterior panel. And I'm actually going to start to play with the rotation on some of these. You'll notice that these aren't repetitive per se, but they have a similar style, but this one's more horizontal, this one's more vertical, so on and so forth. So we're going to replicate that to an extent, and the way I'm going to do that is by clicking on one of these. And if you see these arcs, basically I can hold down Shift and snap it to 90-degree increments. Alternatively, I don't hold Shift and I can kind of freeform do whatever I want with it. So I just want to make sure that all 3 of these are different. So let's do a 180 on this and then kind of like tilt it back this way. I'm also going to scale it real quick. So if I type in scale with it selected, I'm going to go ahead and type in 0.8 and hit enter. And basically what that's going to do is make it 80% the size. So if I do this one and type in 1.2, it's going to make it 120% the size. But I actually want to make it more like 6. Whoops, 0.6. If I select this floor outline, I'm going to go ahead and offset it by, let's say, I don't know, 10. No, let's do 5. And then we'll offset that one by 5 and offset this one by 5. And I'm going to go ahead and file save because it might get kind of weird at this point. I'm going to see if the sprinkler command works really quick by simply typing in move and bringing this over to our surface and typing in sprinkler. Basically, I have to select a base point on the surface that we have, and then I want to click on the target object, which is the surface. I'm going to say 2, and we're not going to randomize them, so we want to make sure that rotation's no and scale equals no. And then I'm going to hit enter, and it doesn't like that, so we're actually not going to use the sprinkler command. Basically, how it works for future reference is if I have a plane, and I type in, let's say, circle, I can basically put that on the surface and sprinkler. I can basically click on that surface and it'll array like a bunch of random ones along that surface. So the reason it doesn't want to do this is because this shape is really complex and the surface is really complex, but it's a good command to have installed in Rhino, even though we are no longer going to use it in this tutorial. So what I'm going to do instead, since that's not working, is select the surface and type array CRV, and I'm going to select a path curve. So basically if I click on one of these offset lines, or actually I'm going to click on the actual building outline, and hit, I don't know, 10, you're going to notice that it basically just arrays it 10 times around that surface. And if you look at it in top view, it's pretty regimented, which I'm not too big of a fan of. So I'm going to go ahead and start to rotate these and kind of push and pull them so that it looks more, I guess, organic, even though that's kind of a buzzword in architecture. Basically make it look more random than it was before. And now that I'm in my top view, I'm actually going to see that these lines are actually probably pretty close to each other. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those real quick. Basically, I'm going to use the gumball tool to just make this look a lot more organic. And I'm not going to fast forward through this one, but I am going to fast forward the next couple of times that we do this. But we're effectively just going to repeat that same process as we move outwards. So I think that looks pretty good. If I select this and type in offset again, and let's make it 10, maybe 15. Let's stick with 10, and then we'll offset this one by 10 as well. We're going to go ahead and do that with our other surfaces. So again, I'm going to type in move, bring this over here, and I'm going to type in move and bring this over here. The reason, the way I did that so quickly is if you right click, it's going to redo the same command that you just did. So once I have this kind of rotated like this, and this rotated like this, again, I'm going to select that object and type in array CRV, select my path curve, and let's shake it up a little bit and put 15 on. And then for this one, I'm going to go ahead and do 13 on. So I'm going to fast forward. Basically, all I'm going to do is go back into my top view and make sure that this is looking a little bit more organic or fluid, so that it doesn't look like it's this really regimented thing. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward starting now. All right, so once we have those in place, basically I want to make sure that everything is touching something in plan view. So we don't want any stragglers where this, isn't touching any of these surfaces. I want to make sure that there's at least some overlap on all of those. And then I'm going to go back into my perspective view. And you'll notice that all of them are kind of hovering around the bottom of this surface, which I'm not too big on. What you can do at this point is just right click your panel layers, and then I'm just going to like deselect a couple of them by control clicking, and shake things up in the vertical direction as well. So again, I'm just going to be control clicking and deselecting some of these things and making it look a bit more natural. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the other two layers. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward again. All right, so from here we are going to just look at things quick in the rendered view. We can see that we're starting to get a lot of this kind of exterior decoration, and it's a lot smoother than it looks maybe in something like the shaded view. You can certainly add as much or as little as you'd like. But one of the things that I wanted to point out in this drawing is that there's a thickness to the walls. So like right now, these are just planes and there's no thickness to the walls at all. So what I'm going to do is make a new layer called Windows and activate that layer, and basically just type in box and hit enter, B-O-X. And I'm just going to make a couple of different size boxes like that. We'll make one like this. We'll make one like that. And we'll make one like this. And then again, if I drag these off to the side and hit Alt and click and drag, it's going to make duplicates of those. So basically what I'm going to want to do is bring those shapes over to my red right here. And we can know that they're intersecting by the way that this face gets cut off by this red. So making sure that, there's some kind of overlap like there is right now, that's going to be good. Basically, we're just going to control click and make sure that all of these pieces end up somewhere cutting off that surface. This thin one might actually not be good. It's not going to help us out very much. And it's kind of hard to predict where these things are going to intersect with this red surface. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and type in offset SRF. And it's going to, we're basically going to click on it so that these arrows are pointing inwards, and we'll just type in 1 and hit enter and hit enter again. And you'll notice that we now have a thickness on that wall. So if I go into a top view, I'm actually going to do these individually. Basically, I just want to make sure that all of these are overlapping entire segments of the red. And we don't want to distribute them evenly. In fact, it would probably be better if we made things kind of asymmetrical. I won't fast forward through this simply because it's kind of a quick process once you figure out how to use the old gumball tool pretty well. And I think that looks pretty good. I think the spacing's nice on those. So if I go back into my perspective view, I just want to make sure that everything is intersecting, which it is. The bottoms of these are below the tops of these. This one's kind of close to some of those panels, so I'm going to drag it up. Actually, I might drag it down a little bit. Yeah, let's drag these down a little bit, actually. Just try to get them as far down as possible, keeping their top edge above the top edge of the red. So do that, and then we'll make it like that. And now what we can do is click on our floor outline in our Windows layers by control clicking and right clicking and selecting all of those objects. And then going to our set view tab, or sorry, our standard tab, and clicking on this fourth light bulb in called isolate objects. No, everything's gone except for the stuff we just had selected. If you don't have any of the tools that I have, type in toolbar. And you'll see like standard C-plane set view. There's the C-plane one. There's the standard one. Basically, you just have to hit the check mark and then hit OK, and then it'll pop up somewhere in your workspace. But from here, I'm going to select this red object and type in Boolean Split. And what that's doing is basically saying this object is a solid surface and it has mass to it. So now it's going to ask me for the cutting surfaces or poly surfaces, and I'm just going to select all of the gray boxes that I just made. And when I right click, basically what it's doing is finding the overlaps between two solid pieces. So you'll notice that where the gray touched the red, that's now a deletable thing. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all of the things that I just made. And that's going to act as our stand-in windows. So that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to make a new layer called cutting plane, and we're going to go ahead and make that dark green. And I'm going to go ahead and type in rectangle, and making sure that I don't have project on, I'm going to click on the top of this surface and basically make something that's bigger than my entire building. And I'm going to type in planar SRF. What that's going to do is make a plane, and we can start to see that there's kind of these skips, just like windows are in drawings like this. So like this would be some kind of doorway, but it's solid, void, solid. We have solid, void, solid. We're going to move this down a little bit, like so. And we just want to make sure that we're cutting through as low as possible on some of these without them actually touching. So that, I think that's the lowest part. Whereas like right here, you can see there's still a little bit like a window ledge. We want to make sure that we're keeping those voids in place. And I think this is looking pretty good. So if I have the gumball tool selected, I can hit on this red rectangle off to the side and click and drag it to make that object bigger. I'm going to go ahead and type in show to bring back everything that we just had. So you notice that the cutting plane is going through some of these surfaces, which is good. So what I'm actually going to do now is select everything except for our cutting plane and type in split, and then select the cutting plane and right click. And you'll notice that it's going to take a second to process. But basically, now all of the top pieces are separated from the bottom pieces. So if I go into a right view, I can go ahead and select everything above this line, which is our cutting plane, and we're going to go ahead and delete that. And if we go back into our parallel or perspective view, we can go ahead and select our plane, and we're going to make a new layer called intersections. And we're going to type in intersect two sets, just like we did in the previous couple of assignments, and basically just select everything except for that cutting plane that we just had selected. So I'm going to go ahead and type in group. I'm going to move that off to the side, and you can see that we start to get some of this more organic-ness that Frank Gehry has in his buildings. So the next thing I'm going to do is get rid of these three lines, and we're going to do a make 2D of this. So we're going to go ahead and actually keep this one that lines the perimeter and type in planar SRF again. We're going to go into a top view. And what I think would be good is if we selected everything except for our floor plate and our wall, and type in split, and then reselect those two objects. It'll take a second to process again. And we can see that 22 surfaces were split into 69 pieces. So what we're going to do from here is basically this got split by the wall. Either you can hold down shift and click all of these things and hide them, which is what I'm going to do very quickly here. There's going to be moments where they kind of show up on the interior of it. And this is just a way that you can clean up and get rid of some of this extra stuff. So you see that's no longer a surface that we need. But for the drawing that we're going to do specifically, we actually don't need to hide some of that stuff. We basically just want to make sure that this is a separate piece from this, and that it's going to be able to show all of the line work that we need. So if we hadn't split this and we did a make 2D, it wouldn't sense that there was an intersection here. Whereas when we break it into two pieces, it knows it's okay, this, and then it's wall, and then it's this, and it'll make all of the lines that we need. So I'm going to go ahead and select all that, do make 2D. I'm first going to save. You should do the same, file save, and then we're going to run our make 2D because it might take a second to process. Scene silhouette, we're going to go ahead and turn off, and I think that's really, I think all the other settings that I have here are good. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. It's going to process for a second, so I may fast forward it depending on how long it takes to do. Okay, and we're back. If it takes a really long time to process the make 2D, go ahead and simply type in, or go ahead and get rid of some of these surfaces, and then try the command again, always saving early and saving often. So it didn't work out quite as I expected it to, but it doesn't really matter because we're just going to use this as a framework. So once we have these lines and we have these lines, I'm going to go ahead and line them up by typing in move and finding a common point between them. So I noticed that this corner is empty and this corner is empty here. So we're going to go ahead and drag these right on top of each other, and you'll see that we still have our poché lines, and conventionally these need to be thinner, which we can touch up in Illustrator. So from here, I think the last thing that I want to do in Rhino is start to play with some of these textures that he has going on. Go ahead and type in, make a new layer and type in textures. And then I just want you to type in line and basically click and drag from one point to the other across the screen, like so. Almost as if you were looking at like farms from above, how they like have a very distinct kind of squared off pattern, also what you see with city maps and things like that. But basically I just want to make sure that all of these lines are touching these outer red ones at some point. So I do something like this, and something like this, and something like this. I think that's looking pretty good. So this is more for the Frank Gehry stuff. I think that I'm going to have a separate tutorial, like I said, for kind of the Lebbeus wood stuff, just to kind of go back to this model and touch some stuff up. But I think it's a good way to start, especially for the Frank Gehry group. And Anakin, even though this doesn't pertain to you 100%, we still need this kind of 3D model, but not necessarily some of this line work that we've done so far. So from here, we are going to go ahead and do File, Export Selected, and we'll call this, make an Illustrator file and call it Line Work Gehry. And we'll make it, I don't know, 20:1. You're going to have to guess on that scale depending on what the scale of your project is and how big it is. A good way to kind of figure it out is type in distance and basically just clicking on two ends of this project. So 271.713 inches. If we want it to be like 2 feet, it would be like a 10:1 ratio, for example. The last thing we want to do for the Frank Gehry group is to go into our rendered view. We're going to go ahead and do a render of this. So I'm going to type in sun and turn the sun on. And basically we want to get some really nice shadows going on with this bad boy. So I'm going to go ahead and hit here, Omaha NB. And basically I'm just going to play around with these settings until I get these shadows that look pretty nice. I think that looks pretty good. And I'm basically just going to zoom in as close as I can while still maintaining the shadow edge, right-clicking on my render box. I think you can play around with this as well. I think 72 and keeping the viewport size should be just fine. We want to make sure that we have a transparent background and that the ground plane is on, and I think this is looking pretty good. If you want, you can bump the skylight ratio down to like 0.5. I like to get a little bit more contrast in my drawings. And I'm going to go ahead and hit render. And that'll of course pump out this underlay image, which we will bring into Illustrator. But in order to get it into Illustrator properly, we're going to go ahead and do a save, do a Gehry render, and make sure that you save it as a PNG. We'll hit save. So from here, I think the joint tutorial is going to kind of wrap up. I think one thing that I should show you all is to do File, Save. And we're going to do what's called a bend command. So if we do bend, basically if you click at 2 points and start to like click and drag, you'll notice that after it is done processing, after it's done processing, that the shape we just made actually gets bent to conform to that axis that we just did. So whereas before it was a straight line, now it's starting to bend back upwards. And I think Anakin, especially in your case, with something like this, kind of getting these arcs, that command is going to be very important. And I think that the Frank Gehry group, you might benefit from this a little bit as well. So you can get as crazy or as not crazy as you want with it. You can also, if you're in a perspectival view, you can type in Dali Zoom, which I covered in the Zaha Hadid tutorial. And if I click and drag, you're going to notice that there's kind of like this vertigo effect where the thing actually starts kind of like reaching out towards the you, basically like kind of the computer screen. And I think that there's these really dynamic forms that Lebbeus Woods does in the same way. And I think that that actually... maybe you want a little bit more Dali Zoom for something like yours, Anakin. And basically just play around with those settings until you get a form that's really dynamic and kind of reaches out and quite frankly, you enjoy. And we're going to do the same thing. We're basically going to hide everything that we don't need, and we're going to render that image. And actually, there might be a floor shadow going on here, which we don't want. So we're going to go ahead and go back to our render settings and turn off the ground plane. I don't know. You can kind of decide if you want to have it. Does Lebbeus do it? Lebbeus kind of shows reflections of stuff, so maybe we should go ahead and keep the ground plane on. Anakin, another thing that you may want to do is do what's called rebuild. So if I type in rebuild on this, rebuild on one of these surfaces and type in like 6, 6, let's see, 6 and 6, excuse me, and I hit OK. Basically what it's going to do is panelize this form, at which point I can type in explode, and then if I select one of these, oops, actually what I need to do is type in extract wireframe, and we're going to put that on a new layer called wireframe, like so. And we're actually going to click on our surface and split it with the objects in the wireframe layer. And you'll notice that it created a bunch of different surfaces. So at this point, we can select a couple of them kind of randomly and type in offset SRF, like we did earlier in the tutorial. Make sure that all the arrows are pointing outwards and just type in like 0.5 or something like that. And the reason that I'm doing that is because you can see there's a lot of like really kind of small components to a lot of this. So if I were to do a rendered view of this, you're going to notice that this already starts to look a lot more kind of subdivided than some of these other smoother panels do. All right, so I'm gonna do this panelization with a couple of other ones, probably only on one facade. Since we're only going to be seeing this one, we probably don't need to do it all the way around. So if I just click, like, I don't know, maybe a couple of these and type in, or go to my intersections layer. Actually, let's go ahead and isolate these. You can either like drag them or click and put them like maybe 10 feet to the left and then hide everything else. Or you can do that isolate tool that we talked about earlier. But I'm going to go ahead and rebuild these ones as well. We'll say 5 and 5, unless it doesn't want to do that. No, we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And that should simplify the meshes. So now when I go to extract wireframe, all of these lines are going to pop up. And basically all I'm going to do is shift click all of my surfaces and type in split, select all of the remaining line work, and then right click or hit enter, and that should split all of those surfaces. Okay, so once I have those, I'm going to go ahead and delete my intersecting lines over here. I'm going to go ahead and click a couple of random ones like this. We're going to go ahead and offset these ones as well. And you can do it at different increments. So these ones I'm going to do at, let's say 0.5 again. Offset SRF, and then 0.5. Hit enter, and it'll take a second to process. At which point I can come back with, I don't know, maybe these guys and some of these, and offset those by 1 foot instead of 0.5. Offset SRF, and we'll do 1. Whoops. Got to re-click those real quick. And again, this is not vital. If your computer can't handle it, don't do it, because mine seems to be having a little bit of trouble with it, and maybe your file will be different. But don't feel obligated to do this or anything in the tutorials for that matter. This is something that's kind of open to interpretation for all of you, so you can kind of approach this however you'd like. But once we have all of those in place, we're going to go ahead and type in show and move that back over 10 feet. And once we get a view of this thing that we like, I'm rather fond of something like this. I kind of like that. I'm going to go ahead and delete all my intersections stuff. Or what layer are you on, big boy? Wireframe. I'm going to go ahead and select the stuff on my wireframe layer, and we're going to go ahead and delete that. I'm going to do a file save, and then I'm going to do a make 2D, and this is probably going to take a long time, so please let it process. We're going to keep all these settings like this, but we're going to go ahead and hit OK. Okay, so before we check on our make 2D, we're going to go ahead and save this view so we can line it up with a render. If we go to this drop down, set view, named views, I'm actually able to set it as line work. And what that means, basically, if I shift like this, obviously the line work's not going to line up with the render we take. So if I go back to my set view, I can just click on line work and it'll bring up that same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm on that view. And we're going to go ahead and render this. And we're going to use this as an underlay once we get into Illustrator. But you can make this as complex or not complex as you'd like. But you can see that we're getting some really nice kind of panelization, some harsh shadows on some of this stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as a PNG. And we'll call it woods render and exit out of that. Now I'm going to check on my line work for that bad boy, which is right here. Actually, some of my original stuff's getting in the way, so I'm going to go ahead and hide all of those. And you can see that it actually did a pretty good job of the make 2D stuff. So I'm going to do the same thing by exporting the selected and making sure it's an Illustrator file, and go Lebius LW. And from here, the tutorial really splits off. I'm going to do a separate post-processing video for Lebius. I'm going to do a separate post-processing video for Frank Gehry. I know this is a lot of information, so please ask questions if you have any of them, and I'm sure you will because you guys picked some pretty complex architects. So don't be afraid to reach out, and we'll see you in the next couple of tutorials.